I never understood how quickly a celebration could turn into a spectacle until the night two women grabbed my arms and dragged me into the center of the Grand Haven Country Club ballroom. The chandeliers above blasted white gold light straight down on me as if I were standing under a spotlight designed for public punishment. Conversations halted mid-sentence, heels stopped clicking, forks hovered in midair. A room filled with curated elegance suddenly transformed into an arena with me positioned as the unwilling entertainment. People pulled out their phones immediately. I heard the soft but sinister chorus of cameras opening lenses, adjusting streams, going live. Near the stage, a well-known fashion influencer named Lila Graves was already broadcasting. Her voice carried through the room because someone had forgotten to mute the audio output. "You guys stay here. Something insane is happening," she said breathlessly. Her viewer count on the screen behind her leaped from 20,000 to 50,000 to 80,000 within seconds. And I was the reason. Margaret, the woman who was supposed to be my future mother-in-law, strutted toward me with a posture so rigid, she looked like she'd been carved into existence for the sole purpose of judging others. She raised one perfectly polished finger toward me and declared loudly, "She does not belong here." Her words echoed across the marble columns, slicing through the room with the precision of a blade. A ripple of laughter moved across the ballroom. Soft, cruel, indulgent. "Where did she get that dress?" someone whispered. "Looks like something a thrift store rejected," another said. They were close enough that I could hear every word, but far enough that they wouldn't have to face the humanity of the person they were shredding. My face burned, but I didn't step back. I had promised myself I wouldn't let anyone push me into shrinking. That promise was already trembling. Margaret stepped closer until her perfume, sharp and expensive, wrapped around me like a net. She tilted her head eyes, scanning me slowly. "This," she announced, projecting her voice like a stage actor, "is exactly what happens when our children refuse to listen to us. They forget standards. They forget class." People tittered. Some lifted their phones higher. A woman near the bar zoomed in on my face as if documenting a rare animal sighting. And then it happened. Margaret's hand shot out with a speed that stunned me. The slap cracked through the ballroom like the burst of a blown speaker. My head snapped to the side, my cheek igniting with pain. Gasps erupted, but no one stepped in. No one told her to stop. They simply watched, fascinated, comfortable in their distance from the humiliation unfolding in front of them. Before I could recover, Natasha, her daughter, grabbed the strap of my dress and yanked with both hands. The seam tore instantly, the fabric ripping down my shoulder. I clutched it with one arm, trying to hold together both the dress and the last remnants of my dignity. The live stream viewer count soared. People angled their cameras, eager for a better shot. This wasn't cruelty hidden behind closed doors. This was cruelty celebrated like entertainment. My voice faltered as I turned toward the only person who should have defended me. Ethan stood near the donor wall, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, fear and embarrassment battling on his face. "Ethan," I whispered, praying he would step forward, that he would finally show signs of the man I thought he was. He leaned in just enough that I could hear him. "Claire, please just apologize to my mom. Don't make a scene." Something inside me broke with a quiet, devastating snap. After everything that had just happened, he wanted me to apologize. He was more afraid of embarrassment than he was of injustice. My heart didn't just sink, it shattered. The ballroom manager rushed forward, his voice strained with forced authority. "Ma'am," he said firmly to Margaret, "if this continues, we will need to call the police. This venue does not permit physical altercations during contracted events." Security guards were already moving in behind him. Margaret waved him off like a gnat. "Then remove her," she said. "She has caused enough disruption." My phone vibrated in my hand. I didn't want to look, but the message lit up the screen with a force stronger than the humiliation tightening around my throat. "Stay where you are. Do not leave. I'm on my way." My breath stilled. I knew that voice. I knew what that message meant. Slowly, I lifted my head. Lila's camera lens pointed directly at me, capturing every flicker of pain, every tremble in my hands, every piece of their mockery. So I stared straight into the lens. My cheeks still throbbed, my dress hung torn, and 200 people waited to see if I would collapse or run. But instead, something steady anchored itself inside me. They thought they were humiliating a nobody. They had no idea who they were humiliating. My name is Claire Donovan, and before that night at the Grand Haven Country Club became the defining humiliation of my adult life, I lived in a world most people only hear about on the news. I was born into the Donovan family, the quiet force behind Atlantic Port and Freight Logistics, a company that controls a significant portion of East Coast shipping lanes, container routes, and international freight contracts. We are not the families who appear on magazine covers or give TED Talks. We are the families who sit in boardrooms with union heads, negotiate port access with government officials, and decide which global companies move their goods through which harbors. Quiet influence, invisible power, the kind of wealth that does not glitter but steadies itself underneath entire economies. Growing up in that world did not feel glamorous. It felt isolating. My father, Thomas Donovan, kept our lives private, insisting on security structure and control. I grew up with drivers, security consultants, and an entire staff who knew my schedule before I did. We traveled often, but never spontaneously. We lived in beautiful homes, but never truly casually. I had everything a child could want, except the one thing no money could buy. Real relationships. Real intentions. Real love. People approached me with smiles that never reached their eyes. Parents pushed their sons toward me with subtle nudges at charity galas. Classmates wanted help getting internships or introductions to executives they Googled before talking to me. Even teachers sometimes treated me like an investment rather than a student. By the time I turned 18, I understood two truths. First, wealth distorts people, even the ones who think they are above it. Second, if I ever wanted someone to know me, the real me, I needed to find a way to exist without the Donovan name overshadowing every breath I took. My mother used to say, money attracts attention, character attracts truth. I clung to that, but the truth was hard to find in a world where everyone had motives layered beneath politeness. In college, I tried blending in. I lived in the dorms, wore simple clothes, avoided conversations about my family. But somehow the truth always leaked out. A roommate saw a security detail near campus. A professor recognized my last name from a trade article. Suddenly, people treated me differently again. Not badly, just carefully, like I was glassware that cost too much to risk dropping. After graduation, I joined the family company for a few years, working in design oversight for port expansion projects. It was safe, predictable, expected. But every time I walked into a room, I could feel people's reactions, deference, judgment, calculation. I wanted someone to look at me and see a woman, not a walking vault or a networking opportunity. So on my 32nd birthday, I made the decision that would change everything. I stepped away. I didn't cut ties with my family, but I stepped out of the shadow of our name. I moved into a small apartment in a historic neighborhood, one with creaky hardwood floors and windows that stuck during the winter. It was imperfect, and it was mine. I took work as an independent interior design consultant using a portfolio built quietly over years, never mentioning my background unless legally required. I shopped at regular stores, carried my own groceries, waited in line at DMV like everyone else. For the first time in my life, strangers treated me like no one special, which felt like the greatest gift I had ever received. I learned how to take buses instead of town cars, how to budget for things I never used to think about, how to introduce myself without watching someone's reaction for the flicker of recognition, and I realized I was happier than I had ever been in any mansion or conference room. But living quietly also taught me something deeper. Without money as a filter, I could finally see how people treated me when they believed I had nothing to offer them. Some were kind, some were indifferent, some were opportunistic in subtler ways, but at least their intentions were transparent. I promised myself one thing. If someone was ever going to love me, really love me, it needed to be for who I was, not what I came from. I promised that I would protect my heart with truth, even if that meant hiding parts of my life until the right time. I believed that keeping my identity understated was the only way to discover whether someone cared for me as a person rather than a status symbol. I had no idea that choosing to live simply would become the catalyst for betrayal, humiliation, and clarity. I also had no idea that the moment Margaret slapped me in that ballroom, the truth about who I was would become the one thing her entire world was unprepared to face. But before all of that happened, before the torn dress and the live stream and Ethan's cowardice, there was just me. A woman trying to exist quietly, honestly, hoping that somewhere in the ordinary world I had chosen, I might finally be seen for my character rather than my lineage. People assume that pretending to be poor is a game, a social experiment, or some kind of ego-driven challenge, but the truth is far simpler and far heavier. I did not wake up one day and decide to abandon luxury for the thrill of anonymity. I did it because my entire life, every relationship I ever had felt conditional. If I showed interest in someone, they wondered what angle I was playing. If someone showed interest in me, I wondered what angle they were playing. It was an exhausting cycle of suspicion wrapped in courtesy. I realized the only way to learn the truth about people was to strip away the one thing that defined every interaction I had ever experienced: the Donovan name. Changing my last name was the first step. I went from Claire Donovan to Claire Dawson, a name plain enough to disappear into crowds. I told my father I needed space, that I wanted to understand who I was outside the gravitational pull of our family legacy. He didn't love the idea, but he respected it. He gave me one rule: keep security informed, even if discreetly. I agreed. Moving into a modest apartment was the next step. It was small, a little cold in winter, and had a persistent rattle in the kitchen pipes, but it felt more like home than any penthouse ever had. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's late-night piano practice, and strangely, that made me feel human. Like I was part of a world where people did things simply because they loved them, not because they were expected to perform excellence. I sold or donated most of my designer clothes and kept only a small box of essentials. My wardrobe became a collection of simple dresses, jeans, cotton tops, and worn-in sweaters. I bought groceries with a budget for the first time in my adult life. I clipped coupons just to understand what it felt like. And surprisingly, every bit of it grounded me. When you grow up with abundance, scarcity teaches you humility. When you grow up with power, anonymity teaches you perspective. I wanted both. I needed both. I chose work that allowed me to blend in. Interior design was the right fit because it let me use the skills I had quietly developed while shadowing architects and designers during port expansion projects. Clients hired me because they liked my ideas, not because of my last name. For the first time, my work was judged on merit alone. I remember one older couple telling me, "You have a good eye, dear. You must have worked hard to develop it." I smiled because it was the first compliment in years that felt entirely authentic. And then there was friendship. Real friendship. When people met me as Claire Dawson, they asked normal questions. What shows I liked, where I grew up, what coffee I preferred. They laughed with me without calculating what my presence could do for them. It was liberating. But underneath that liberation was fear. A constant, quiet fear that the moment someone discovered the truth, everything would shift again. I lived with that fear because the alternative was worse. Living a life where no one saw me for who I truly was. I used to stand in front of my mirror looking at the version of myself that wore no jewelry, no designer labels, no armor, and I would whisper, "If someone loves you, it has to be for this version, not the curated one." Pretending to be poor wasn't a disguise. It was a filter, a way to see through people, a way to guard my heart. So when I met Ethan and he didn't ask me about my background, my family, or my financial plans for the future, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. He treated me like an equal, like a woman he enjoyed talking to, not a title or a potential asset. I thought I had finally found someone who saw me clearly, someone who loved the simple version of me. But that belief was exactly what made the betrayal so sharp. The night Margaret slapped me didn't just hurt because of the violence or the humiliation. It hurt because I realized I had been testing others while completely blind to the truth about the man standing beside me. I went undercover to see people's true character. I just didn't expect the results to break me, or to save me, because losing their approval was the moment I gained my clarity. And everything that came afterward was shaped by that choice to live simply honestly, even if it meant pretending to be less than what I truly was. I met Ethan Miller on a rainy Thursday morning, the kind of morning when the clouds hang low enough to touch the tops of buildings and the air feels heavy with unspoken stories. I had ducked into a small cafe to escape the drizzle shaking raindrops from my hair while trying to warm my hands around a cup of coffee. Ethan sat at the table next to mine, muttering to himself as he wrestled with a malfunctioning laptop. The frustration in his voice was loud enough that the couple beside him got up and moved. I watched him for a moment, noticing the tension in his shoulders the way he kept running a hand through his hair. It reminded me of men in boardrooms trying to negotiate impossible deadlines. Something about the scene made me smile. When he groaned in defeat and slammed the laptop shut, I gently leaned over and said, "It's probably the software update. I've seen that glitch before." He looked up startled, and for a moment I saw the exhaustion in his eyes dissolve into hope. "You know how to fix it?" he asked. I did. Within a few minutes, his presentation file opened without issue. Ethan's relief was so genuine that it disarmed me. He insisted on buying my coffee, and before I knew it, we were sitting across from each other talking as though we were old friends. He told me he was a project director for a real estate development company, that his work involved coordinating teams overseeing renovations and dealing with impossible timelines. I told him I was an interior design consultant. Neither of us mentioned family. Neither of us mentioned money. The simplicity of that conversation felt like a breath of fresh air. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. Coffee dates that turned into long walks. Evenings spent cooking simple meals in my tiny apartment. Days when he would bring me flowers just because. I had dated men who arrived with chauffeurs and gifts chosen by assistants. Ethan arrived with a $6 bouquet wrapped in brown paper and a smile that felt real. He listened when I talked. He laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones. He remembered small details like the way I preferred my tea or the fact that I loved old movies. Little things that felt bigger than any grand gesture. But there were moments, subtle ones, when the cracks in his confidence showed. He mentioned once that his family was traditional, then immediately changed the subject. He talked about expectations he never felt he lived up to. He hinted at pressure, at judgment, at roles he struggled to fill. Still, none of it seemed alarming at the time. I thought he was simply being vulnerable. I thought it meant he trusted me. The longer we dated, the more I let myself believe that he saw me, not a version of me projected through wealth or status. He didn't question why I didn't wear expensive clothes. He didn't wonder why I drove an older car. He never asked where I came from. He never hinted at curiosity about my financial situation. Instead, he seemed to like the life I presented, the one built on simplicity and warmth. That brought me comfort. It made me feel safe. And because I trusted him, I ignored the small red flags. Like the way he would tense whenever his phone buzzed with a message from his mother. Or how he would phrase certain comments. "My family has high standards. My mom is a bit intense, but it's just how she shows love. They'll appreciate you once they get to know you." At the time, I didn't realize those were not reassurances. They were warnings disguised as kindness. When he finally asked me to meet his family at the annual gala, his voice trembled with excitement and fear. "It would mean a lot to me," he said. "I want them to see who I love." I remember smiling, believing that love was enough to bridge differences, trusting that character mattered more than class. I didn't know then how wrong I was. Looking back, I can see the truth clearly. I loved Ethan because he felt different from everything I had run from. I loved him because he made me feel ordinary in the best way. And I believed he loved me for the same reasons. But love, I learned, is not always what you think it is. Sometimes it is simply a mirror reflecting what you want to see. Sometimes it is a shadow hiding the truths you refuse to face. I trusted Ethan because I needed someone to believe in. I chose him because I wanted proof that I could find love without the Donovan name shaping the rules. I never imagined that the man who held my hand in quiet coffee shops would stand frozen in a ballroom watching his family tear me apart. I never imagined that the man I trusted most would become the symbol of my deepest disappointment. But that night taught me something I should have known all along. Love without courage is not love at all. And standing beside someone is meaningless if they refuse to stand up for you. The warning came from someone I never expected, and it arrived quietly, almost gently, the way thunderstorms sometimes begin with a single shift in the wind. Her name was Marlene, a former household manager who had worked for my family when I was a teenager. She had retired years ago, moved to a small town along the coast, and built a quieter life for herself. But she still reached out occasionally, sending holiday cards or calling to check in on my father when port negotiations became tense. I hadn't spoken to her in months when she called one afternoon out of the blue. "Claire." "Dear," she said, her voice warm but edged with something that made me sit up straight. "I hear you're seeing someone." I froze. Only 2 people knew about Ethan, my best friend, and my father's discreet security liaison. "Who told you?" I asked. "People talk," she said simply. "Especially people in the circles your young man's family travels in." My stomach tightened. "Marlene, what do you know?" She sighed, the kind of sigh someone gives when they love you enough to tell you something you won't want to hear. Families like the Millers don't just judge Claire. They test, they poke, they push. They want to know the worth of the person dating their son, and I'm not talking about kindness or character. I'm talking about status. I tried to laugh it off. "I'm not trying to impress them." "That is exactly why you should be careful," she said. "When people who value power sense that you don't have any or believe you don't, they either try to dominate you or dismiss you." Her words struck deeper than I expected because a quiet part of me already feared that Ethan's family might not be the warm, gracious people he pretended they were. "Do you think they'll be rude?" I asked. "I think," she answered slowly, "that they will look for weaknesses. And because you're going in as Claire Dawson, not as Claire Donovan, they will believe you have no protection." My breath caught. She wasn't wrong. That was the point of my undercover life. But hearing it said out loud made the risk feel sharper, more real. "So what are you telling me to do?" I whispered. "I'm telling you to keep your phone charged," she said. "Keep it in your hand or your pocket at all times. And record if you need to. Not for revenge, Claire. For truth. People show who they are when they think no one important is watching." The last line hit me like a cold wind. "Why does this feel like you're telling me something you've already seen happen?" I asked. Another sigh. A heavier one. Because I've seen women walk into powerful families thinking love would shield them. And I've seen them walk out alone, embarrassed and shattered, because the man they trusted didn't have the backbone to stand between them and his family's cruelty. My throat tightened. "Are you saying Ethan's weak?" "I'm saying Ethan is loyal to his mother," Marlene said carefully. "And loyalty without discernment can lead to betrayal." I stared at the wall in front of me, the quiet hum of my apartment suddenly feeling too loud. "You think I shouldn't go to the gala?" I said. "I think," she replied softly, "that you should go prepared." There was a pause long enough for me to consider every scenario I had avoided thinking about. "Marlene," I said finally, "thank you. Really. Be safe, dear," she murmured. "And remember what I always told you when you were little. When someone shows you who they are, don't argue. Believe them." When the call ended, I sat there holding the phone long after the screen went dark. I knew she was right. I knew the Millers could be exactly the kind of people who weaponize judgment. But I also believed in Ethan. Or maybe I believed in who I hoped he was. That was the real danger. Not the Millers, not the gala. My own hope. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of uneasy stillness that settles over a room right before a storm breaks. I stood in front of my closet far longer than necessary, staring at the dresses hanging neatly in a row. Most were simple pieces I had collected over the past 2 years. Fabric soft from wear colors muted enough to blend into any crowd. I chose a modest navy dress, the kind that skimmed the body without drawing attention, elegant in its own quiet way, but unmistakably inexpensive compared to what I knew the other women would be wearing. I slipped it on, slowly smoothing the hem, wondering whether I should have gone with something slightly more polished. But then I reminded myself I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to see truth. Still, truth had a way of making my stomach twist. I kept my jewelry minimal, just a small pair of pearl studs and a delicate chain bracelet. Nothing that hinted at wealth. Nothing that might betray the life I had stepped away from. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw the version of me I worked so hard to protect. Simple, unassuming, vulnerable maybe, but honest, and that honesty scared me. When Ethan arrived to pick me up, he hesitated on my doorstep. His eyes ran the length of the dress, then flicked away before landing back on my face. It was barely a second, but the disappointment registered like a pinprick. "You look nice," he said. "Nice. Not beautiful, not perfect. Nice." I forced a smile. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said too quickly. "I just thought maybe you'd wear something more formal." My anxiety tightened. "This is formal for me." He nodded, but the tension settled between us like fog. The car ride to the country club was quieter than usual. Ethan kept checking his watch, tapping his fingers against his knee, shifting as though something inside him was wound too tightly. I tried to make small talk, asking about his work week or whether his sister would be attending, but his answers were clipped. Eventually, I fell silent, choosing to watch the passing streetlights blur against the window instead. As we pulled into the gated entrance of the Grand Haven Country Club, my breath caught. The property sprawled across manicured lawns, hedges trimmed so sharply they could have been cut with lasers. Luxury cars lined the circular drive. Women in gowns worth more than some people's yearly salaries stepped gracefully onto the red brick walkway, their diamonds catching the light from the courtyard lanterns. Ethan exhaled slowly as if preparing himself. "Listen," he said, keeping his eyes forward, "my family can be intense. Just don't let them get under your skin." "Should I be worried?" I asked. He hesitated for a fraction too long. "No, no," he said, shaking his head. "Just be polite. And maybe let me do most of the talking." The unease that had been curled in my stomach all evening finally stretched awake. "Why would I need to do that?" "It's just easier," he muttered. "They have certain expectations." Expectations. The word felt heavy, loaded. And suddenly, the dress I had chosen felt too plain, the bracelet too thin, the life I had built for myself too fragile to withstand the scrutiny I was about to face. Still, I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to start the night with a fight. As we walked toward the entrance, Ethan placed a gentle hand on my back, guiding me as though I couldn't navigate on my own. The gesture felt strange, almost rehearsed. Inside the foyer, I caught a glimpse of myself in a gilt-framed mirror. I looked small beside him, not in size, but in presence, as though the world he came from could swallow me whole if it chose to. A staff member approached to take our coats, offering Ethan a warm smile before turning to me with a polite but noticeably cooler one. It was subtle, barely there, but enough to make my pulse quicken. I reminded myself of Marlene's warning. These families don't just judge, they test. As we stepped toward the ballroom doors, the sounds of music and voices swelled. Ethan squeezed my hand once before pushing the doors open, but his palm was cold slick with nerves. And for the first time since meeting him, I wondered if he was bringing me into this world because he loved me, or because he hoped I would somehow fit into the mold his family had carved long before I ever existed. The moment the ballroom doors opened, a wave of sound, color, and scrutiny washed over me. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks overhead, scattering golden light across tables draped in white linen and trimmed in metallic gold thread. A string quartet played near the stage, their notes floating elegantly above the hum of conversation. But none of it softened the sharp shift in the air as dozens of heads turned toward the entrance, evaluating us with a kind of curiosity that felt more like inspection. Ethan straightened his posture, plastering a tight smile on his face, the kind that suggested both pride and apprehension. His grip on my hand tightened as we stepped forward, and immediately I felt eyes scanning me, sweeping from my shoes to my hair in a single sweeping motion that stung more than I wanted to admit. Wealthy crowds have a way of communicating judgment without saying a word. A lifted eyebrow, a suppressed smirk, a whisper disguised as a polite greeting. Within seconds, I realized this wasn't just a party. It was a hierarchy on display, an unspoken competition in extravagance, and I was entering it unequipped by design. A hostess approached us wearing a fitted black dress and a practiced smile. "Good evening, Mr. Miller," she said warmly before shifting her gaze to me. Her smile dimmed ever so slightly, the professional courtesy thinning at the edges. And guest. The word struck like a flick. Not name, not welcome, Guest. I introduced myself anyway, offering a small polite smile. Claire Dawson. She repeated it without interest, marking our names on a tablet. Your table is near the center, right this way. As she led us through the room, I felt the eyes of guests trailing behind us like shadows. Women in dresses that shimmered beneath the lights leaned closer to whisper behind manicured hands. Men looked at Ethan with approving nods before glancing at me with unmistakable disappointment. It was clear I didn't fit their script, not in appearance, not in background, not in the silent checklist of pedigree they all seemed to carry. Halfway across the ballroom, a group of middle-aged women paused in their conversation as we passed. One of them in a sequined silver gown tilted her head and barely whispered, "Is that who he brought?" I didn't turn to look. I didn't need to. Humiliation has a temperature, and I felt it rising along my spine. Ethan kept walking oblivious or pretending to be. "You're doing great," he murmured, as if I were a child performing on stage for the first time. We reached the center of the room, where a long, oval table sat beneath the chandelier's brightest beam. And there she was, Margaret Miller. Her presence was unmistakable. She wore an emerald satin gown that looked custom-made, her hair swept into an elegant chignon, her wrist dripping in diamonds. She stood like someone accustomed to being admired, feared, or both. Beside her, a small group of guests laughed at something she said, their reactions just a little too enthusiastic to be genuine. When she saw Ethan approaching, her face softened, but only for him. Her eyes flicked to me and the warmth vanished, replaced by a coldness so sharp it felt physical. "Ethan," she said, air-kissing both his cheeks. "You look wonderful." Then she turned to me without extending a hand. "And you must be—" "Claire," I answered, offering a polite smile. She let her gaze drift slowly over my dress, my shoes, my simple jewelry. It felt clinical, dissecting. She said. "Just that." A single sound loaded with judgment. Mother Ethan said, forcing a cheerful tone, "I've told you about Claire. She's—" "Yes, yes." She cut in already dismissive. The interior designer, the way she said it implied it wasn't a real profession, or at least not one worthy of her son. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit joined us, Kenneth Miller, Ethan's father. He shook Ethan's hand firmly, then nodded in my direction as if I were an afterthought. "Welcome," he said, but the word lacked sincerity, falling flat between us like a formality he resented performing. Before I could respond, another voice chimed in, bright and sharp. "Well, well, well! So the mystery girlfriend exists after all. Natasha." Ethan's younger sister. She was striking, long blonde hair, perfect makeup, a red dress that demanded attention. She circled me slowly, assessing openly, shamelessly. I expected someone different. The implication hung in the air like perfume. The guests at nearby tables began to watch, not obviously, but with the kind of angled glances that made my skin prickle. Natasha Ethan warned under his breath, but she ignored him, leaning in to examine the seams of my dress. "This is cute," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Very charming." "Vintage." "Just simple," I replied, forcing calm into my voice. She laughed softly. "Simple is one word for it." Margaret took a sip of champagne. "Ethan? Dear, you should have mentioned the event's dress code." I felt heat spread across my cheeks. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. "I did," he finally muttered. "Claire prefers understated clothing." Natasha raised a brow. "Understated?" "This is barely formal," Natasha Ethan snapped quietly. "But the damage was done." The whispers resumed louder this time, emboldened by the family's disdain. A man at the next table whispered, "This can't be serious," while his partner hid a smirk behind her glass. I clenched my hands at my sides, nails pressing into my palms. Every instinct told me to walk away, but I stayed because leaving would have proven their assumptions right, that I wasn't strong enough, poised enough, or worthy enough to stand among them. "Shall we sit?" Ethan asked, desperate to end the tension. Margaret nodded stiffly, gliding into her seat. As everyone arranged themselves around the table, I felt the atmosphere tighten even further. This wasn't a dinner. It was a social battlefield, and I was the easiest target in the room. I didn't know then that the humiliation had barely begun, or that the worst part wouldn't be the judgmental stares or the cruel comments. It would be Ethan's silence. Dinner hadn't even started when the first blow landed, not a physical one, but the kind that slices straight through dignity with perfect precision. As soon as we sat down, the conversation at the table shifted subtly, then blatantly, toward topics meant to highlight everything they assumed I lacked. Margaret lifted her champagne flute and said loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "Some people don't understand the value of presentation. It reflects upbringing." Natasha giggled behind her napkin. Kenneth didn't even bother to hide his smirk. The women around them nodded, exchanging approving glances as though cruelty were currency. I tried to focus on steadying my breath while Ethan stared down at his silverware, tapping the knife rhythmically against the plate in a nervous pattern. He did nothing to stop them. Not one word. Across the ballroom, I noticed Lila Graves, the influencer already known for turning other people's misfortunes into content, setting up her tripod near the dessert table. She kept glancing toward us as if anticipating drama. A few of her followers recognized her and whispered excitedly. Phones were already coming out. It was only a matter of time. When the first course was served, conversation resumed, except now it wasn't subtle. A woman in a glittering gold gown leaned over to Margaret and asked, "So, who is she? Where did Ethan find her?" Margaret whispered back with absolutely no intention of keeping her voice down. "She's an interior designer. Or claims to be." Laughter rippled across the table. Natasha leaned toward me, her tone coated in faux curiosity. "So, Claire, where did you go to school again?" I answered calmly. "Boston Institute of Design." She blinked slowly. "Is that accredited?" The woman beside her choked on a laugh. My chest tightened, but I kept my shoulders straight. "Yes," I replied. "It's fully accredited." Natasha shrugged dismissively. "Never heard of it. A man across from us, someone introduced earlier as a partner at a development firm, joined in. Ethan, your girlfriends usually come from more traditional circles, don't they?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Can we not do this tonight?" "Oh, relax," Natasha said, waving her hand. "We're just getting to know her." Her gaze shifted pointedly to my dress again. "Though I have to say, this look is bold. Very frugal chic." Kenneth chuckled. "Looks more like budget desperation if you ask me." My fingers curled under the tablecloth, gripping tightly. Heat spread through my body, part shame, part rage. I felt like prey surrounded by predators dressed in couture. When the servers began clearing the plates, the room's lighting dimmed slightly, prompting people to pull out their phones again. Lila, taking advantage of the shift, announced loudly, "Going live in 3, 2, 1. A bright red live icon glowed on her phone screen. Her voice carried across the ballroom. "You guys are not going to believe what's happening at this table." She angled the camera in our direction. Conversations around us grew quieter as more people tuned into her live stream, glancing between their screens and our table. Ethan leaned in. "Don't look at her," he whispered. "She's always dramatic." But my attention was pulled elsewhere, toward Margaret, rising from her chair with a cold determination in her eyes. She stepped around the table, pausing behind me. "Stand up," she commanded. I froze. "Why?" "Because I asked you to." Her voice was firm, cutting expectant. Margaret Ethan said nervously, half standing. "Mom, please sit down," she snapped at him. "I'm handling this." He sank back into his chair like a scolded child. My heart pounded. Slowly, I pushed my chair back and rose. Margaret circled me as though conducting an inspection. Lila squealed from across the room. "Oh my God, it's happening. Stay tuned, everyone." This is gold." Margaret stopped in front of me. "Tell me, Claire," she said, projecting her voice so the nearest 5 tables could hear. "Did you really think coming here dressed like that was appropriate?" A sharp inhale traveled through the audience. Cameras lifted higher. I swallowed hard. I dressed respectfully. I answered, "Respectfully?" She laughed. "This is a formal gala at one of the most prestigious clubs on the East Coast, not a charity brunch, and you walk in here looking like you wandered out of a discount rack." Her words were daggers. Natasha joined her, stepping closer and tugging at my sleeve. Look at these seams, she announced. They're uneven. I could rip this whole dress with one hand. I pulled my arm back instinctively. Please don't touch me. Touch you, Natasha repeated mockingly. Why is it delicate? Did it cost $30 or $40? Natasha, Ethan hissed under his breath. But still he did nothing. The crowd was swelling now, drawn in like moths to a flame. Lila's livestream viewer count projected on her tablet for all to see soared past 20,000. Margaret folded her arms. Let's not pretend, she said. You're here because you think my son will elevate your life. Isn't that right? That's not true, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Natasha rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. It's obvious. You're a gold digger. You see a wealthy family and you latch on. Classic social climbing. I'm not. Save it, Margaret snapped. You're not fooling anyone. She stepped closer, her face inches from mine. My son deserves someone from his world, someone with class, someone with breeding. I felt the humiliation rising like a hot wave under my skin. Please stop, I whispered. Please don't do this. Why not? Margaret challenged. Afraid the truth hurts. For a moment, the room fell strangely quiet. Even the string quartet's music faltered, the notes stumbling as though mirroring the tension thickening in the air. Someone in the back murmured, "This is insane," another whispered. "She should just leave." I considered it. Walking away would have been easier, cleaner. But something in me refused to move. If I left now, I would be leaving behind my dignity, leaving behind the truth that I deserved better than this. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Natasha reached out, grabbed my dress at the shoulder seam, and yanked hard. The fabric tore down the side with a loud rip that echoed through the ballroom. Gasps exploded across the room. Lila screamed with excitement. "Oh my God, we're live, guys! You saw that! Her viewer count hit 50,000. Cameras angled in. Phones rose higher. Margaret didn't stop her daughter. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she smirked. "Security!" she called out. "Remove her from my event." 2 uniformed staff members moved toward me. My breath came out in small, shaky bursts. My dignity hung in tatters, my dress ripped, my chest exposed just enough that I had to clutch the fabric against me. I looked at Ethan, hoping just once that he would stand up, defend me, love me enough to push back. Instead, he whispered barely audible, "Claire, please, don't make this worse. Don't make this worse." As though I were the cause. As though my presence, my personhood, my existence in his world had created this spectacle. The tears came then, not because of the humiliation, but because I finally understood. Ethan would never choose me over them, not even when I needed him most. The influencer zoomed in on my face. "Everyone is saying she should fight back," she shouted into her phone. "But I don't think she will. Look at her. She's breaking. She was wrong. I wasn't breaking. I was waking up, and the world was watching." In the seconds after Natasha tore my dress, time did not slow the way people often describe in dramatic moments. If anything, it sped up. Voices blurred together into an indistinguishable roar. Flashing lights from dozens of phone cameras flickered like lightning, and the floor beneath me felt unsteady, as if the entire ballroom were tilting off balance. Yet inside my mind, something settled. Something sharp. Something unmistakably clear. For months, I had tried to see the best in Ethan, tried to believe he was separate from the world he came from, tried to trust that love could exist without courage. But standing there, clutching the torn fabric of my dress against my chest, while hundreds watched like spectators at a sport, I realized the truth Marlene had warned me about. Silence is a choice. And Ethan was choosing them, choosing comfort, choosing compliance, choosing cowardice. He wasn't frozen. He wasn't shocked. He was calculating how to make this moment easier for himself, even if it came at the cost of my dignity. That realization changed everything. The humiliation that had been burning hot across my skin, cooled, suddenly replaced by something steadier. Resolve, calm, even a strange sense of freedom. Because once you stop hoping someone will protect you, you stop being afraid of the moment they don't. I straightened my back, no longer shielding myself from the cameras pointed at me. If they wanted a spectacle, I would give them something they didn't expect: a woman not collapsing under disgrace, but reclaiming her voice. I loosened my grip on the torn fabric just enough to hold it securely without looking desperate. Then I lifted my chin. The room reacted instantly. Whispers spread like cracks in ice. A few people lowered their phones, startled by the shift in my posture. Others leaned in, sensing something had changed. Natasha scoffed. "What are you doing? Trying to act brave now." I ignored her. I kept my gaze fixed forward right into Lila's live stream camera. For a moment, the lens felt like an anchor, something solid to hold onto amid the chaos. I could see the red live icon glowing, the viewer count ticking upward so fast it blurred. 50,000, 53,000, 59,000. Somewhere behind me, Margaret hissed, "Stop looking at that camera! Stop drawing attention!" But attention had already found us. I inhaled slowly, steadying my voice. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. "I'm not leaving," I said. A murmur rippled through the room. Natasha laughed. "Are you kidding? You don't get to decide that." "Actually," I said, meeting her stare with newfound strength, "I do." Kenneth's voice boomed from the table. "Young lady, this is not your place. This is a private event." "And yet," I replied softly, "you made my humiliation public." The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. People froze, unsure whether to keep recording or pretend they weren't part of the madness. Ethan finally stepped toward me, his face pale, his voice low. "Claire, please, don't make this harder. Harder!" As if any part of this had been easy. As if he wasn't standing inches from the woman he claimed to love while his family tore her apart. That was the moment something inside me snapped cleanly in two. Not in a way that shattered, but in a way that severed the tie between who I had been and who I was about to become. "Ethan," I said quietly, "you've shown me exactly who you are." And just like that, the fear evaporated. The shame dissolved. All that remained was purpose, strength, and the certainty that this night, which they thought would break me, would instead expose them. I glanced one more time into the camera, my voice steady. "You all wanted an audience," I whispered. "So let them see." The awakening had begun, and nothing would protect them from what was coming next. The ballroom had begun to fracture under the weight of its own cruelty when the first sign of authority arrived, not with sirens or shouts, but with the sudden synchronized movement of two uniformed officers stepping into the doorway. Their presence cut through the chaos like a clean blade. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Laughter died instantly, and even the music stuttered before fading into silence. People instinctively straightened their posture as though guilt alone could pull their shoulders back. Phones lowered. Whispers crawled to a halt. For the first time that evening, the crowd remembered they were living in a world with consequences. Ethan's mother stiffened. Her fingers curled around her champagne flute so tightly that I worried it might shatter in her hand. Natasha blinked rapidly, her face flushing then paling as the officers surveyed the room with calm, trained awareness. One officer, a woman with dark hair pulled into a flawless bun, stepped forward and spoke in a clear, measured tone. "We received a disturbance report from venue management. Who is the victim involved?" The word victim sliced through the air, and the ripple that followed was electric. Margaret's jaw tightened as though she had swallowed something sharp. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "A family matter." The officer didn't even glance at her. "Ma'am will determine that." The venue manager, who had been hovering anxiously near the stage, lifted a trembling hand and pointed directly at me. "She's the one who was assaulted. There are multiple witnesses. And the incident was live-streamed." A collective inhalation spread through the crowd. Live-streamed. The reminder made several guests turn pale. The officer motioned me forward with a gentleness that nearly broke something inside me. Not pity. Respect. recognition. "Miss, are you injured?" she asked. "Do you need medical attention?" Before I could answer, a stir erupted near the opposite entrance of the ballroom. The double doors swung open and two additional figures entered, not police, not guests, but men in tailored suits with the precise, understated confidence of people accustomed to stepping into chaos and neutralizing it. The moment I saw them, the air caught in my lungs. Atlantic Port and Freight Logistics Security Division, my family's people, and they were not here by coincidence. The taller one, a man named Harris, whom I had known since childhood, scanned the room before locking onto me with unmistakable urgency. He moved forward quickly, the audience parting, as though pushed aside by an invisible force. Behind him was another familiar face, our general counsel, a meticulous, razor-sharp attorney named Ms. Rowan, who rarely appeared anywhere uninvited. If she was here, things had already escalated far beyond public humiliation. Harris reached me first. "Miss Donovan," he said, his voice low but firm. "We need to confirm you're safe. Your father instructed immediate intervention." My heart thudded once hard. My father, which meant he had seen the live stream, all of it, every slap, every insult, every degrading second. Rowan stepped beside him and addressed the officers calmly. "We have already secured the recorded footage from multiple angles. The live stream included several acts that fall under criminal assault, harassment, and defamation. We intend to cooperate fully with your investigation." The officer nodded, shifting her stance in acknowledgement. "We'll need statements." "You'll have them," Rowan replied. Her eyes then flicked to Margaret, whose expression now twisted into something feral. "This is outrageous," Margaret hissed. "She is manipulating this situation. She provoked everything." Rowan raised one eyebrow, the sort of expression that conveyed volumes without a single word. "Ma'am, there are digital records of your behavior," she said. "Attempting to rewrite events will not mitigate liability." Liability. A word that landed like a boulder. People in old money circles feared two things more than scandal exposure and financial consequence, and both were closing in. At that moment, Harris's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face shifted subtly before he held the device toward me. "It's your father," he said. "He's on video call." The room froze. Completely. My hands trembled as I took the phone. The screen illuminated with my father's face, stern-composed and frighteningly silent. Behind him in his office, I recognized the polished wood panels and the collection of maritime artifacts he had gathered over decades. His voice emerged evenly amplified by the officer's body cams and the cavernous acoustics of the ballroom. "Claire," he said, "are you safe?" The directness of his question pierced through the numbness I had been wrapped in. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm okay." His gaze sharpened. "Good. Security has informed me of the situation. We have the footage. All of it." The words echoed across the room, ricocheting off crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Natasha swallowed hard. Kenneth's face drained of its color. Margaret didn't blink. My father continued, his voice steady as steel. "Effective immediately, all Atlantic Port and Freight Logistics Partnerships leases and contracts associated with the Miller family and Acadia Estates Holdings are suspended pending legal review and board vote. Our morals clause is explicit. We will not be affiliated with misconduct." Gasps erupted around us. Ethan's knees buckled as though invisible hands had punched the air out of him. "Dad," he whispered, barely audible. Harris stepped closer, interjecting. "Additionally, Miss Donovan, your father requested we inform you that a representative team is en route to the venue to retrieve you safely." There it was. Authority in its purest form. Order replacing chaos. Justice unfolding not through violence or rage, but through accountability, structure, consequence. Margaret's chest rose sharply, her voice breaking into a brittle pitch. "You can't do this. You have no right." "On the contrary," Rowan replied evenly. "He has every right. You assaulted his daughter." The officer stepped forward again. "Ma'am," the female officer said calmly, "I need you and your daughter to remain where you are. We are taking statements and reviewing video evidence." The shift was undeniable. Minutes ago, they had believed they were in control. Now control had been ripped from their hands so thoroughly that the room itself seemed to tilt toward me. And as I stood there between law enforcement and my family's legal and security teams, a quiet certainty settled into my bones. I was no longer the girl they tried to break. I was the woman who would watch them answer for it. The shift from humiliation to reckoning happened so fast that even I found myself struggling to keep pace with the momentum. One moment, I stood half-torn and trembling in the center of a ballroom filled with people who delighted in watching me unravel. The next, the power dynamic flipped so violently that the very same crowd began withdrawing their phones, lowering their gazes, and stepping back as though afraid of being caught in the blast radius of what was coming. And what was coming was inevitable. It had been set in motion the moment the live stream hit its first 1,000 viewers, the moment Margaret raised her hand, the moment Ethan begged me to apologize instead of defending me. All of it had been fuel. Now the fire had begun. After my father's declaration, a wave of uneasy murmurs surged through the room. Guests who had smugly filmed me minutes earlier began to exchange nervous glances, suddenly aware that evidence cuts both ways. Business associates who once fawned over the Miller family were already doing the mental math trying to calculate how this scandal would affect their own standing. Kenneth Miller was the first to break. His voice cracked as he pushed past the people blocking his path. "This is being blown out of proportion," he insisted, directing his words at Rowan as though she were a negotiator sent to extinguish a misunderstanding. "My wife overreacted. It was, what do you call it, an emotional moment. A family disagreement." "Assault," Rowan corrected calmly. "The term is assault, and defamation, and recorded harassment, and while I'm sure you'd prefer to frame this as a private matter, the public nature of the live stream removes that luxury." The color drained from Kenneth's face. He looked at Ethan, desperation bleeding into every line of his expression. "Say something," he hissed. "Fix this." Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because even he understood now that there was nothing to fix, only consequences to face. Meanwhile, Lila, whose live stream had become the accidental catalyst for this unraveling, stood frozen near the bar, her ring light still glowing. Her viewers, now well over 150,000, were commenting so rapidly that the feed scrolled like a waterfall. I could see the screen from where I stood, text after text, demanding accountability, calling out the Millers, tagging news outlets, speculating about lawsuits. For the first time that night, Lila looked frightened. She reached out toward the phone, perhaps considering ending the stream, but one of the officers intervened. "Ma'am, please keep the recording active," the officer instructed. "It's evidence. Evidence." The word kept ricocheting off the marble columns, and with every ricochet, someone else in the room flinched. Then came the next blow. Rowan lifted a document from her leather portfolio and handed it to the venue manager. Per contractual stipulations, she said her tone even we are enforcing an immediate morals clause suspension for the Miller family's annual gala privileges and sponsorship benefits. Grand Haven Country Club will receive formal notice within the next 30 minutes. The manager scanned the page, his eyes widening with each sentence. When he looked up, his expression was grim. "This means the Millers are barred from hosting events here pending investigation," he said. "Effective tonight." Margaret lurched forward. "You can't bar us from our own club," she protested. "We've been donors for 22 years. "Rules apply to donors," the manager said firmly. "And to members, especially to members." He signaled toward security. Not police venue security. Their presence alone was a humiliation so exquisite it bordered on poetic. But Rowan wasn't done. She turned to the officers. "We would also like to formally submit our footage for review under the state's harassment and assault statutes. Miss Donovan is willing to provide her statement immediately." I nodded, feeling a strange, calm strength settle over me. A strength that came not from revenge, but from clarity. Margaret sputtered. "This is madness. She's manipulating all of you." Rowan raised a finger. "Actually, you manipulated yourself. On camera, repeatedly." Natasha stepped in, her voice trembling. "I didn't hit her," she insisted. "I just grabbed her dress." "And tore it," the female officer said. "That qualifies as physical aggression if the victim experienced fear or harm." "Fear," Natasha scoffed. She's acting. She's pretending. I stepped forward, then just enough to meet her eyes. Am I pretending now? Natasha's mouth snapped shut. The officer began collecting statements. Witnesses approached hesitantly, many of them suddenly willing to cooperate now that they recognized where the wind was blowing. Some provided photos, others provided video. Several even apologized to me under their breath, though I had no interest in their guilt-driven remorse. Every piece of evidence stacked the scales further away from the Millers, and every minute that passed made the consequences more unavoidable. Then, as if summoned by the shift in power, the live stream counter ticked upward again 200,000 viewers, then 215,000. News outlets were already joining the chat. The story was spreading like wildfire, and the Millers could do nothing to contain it. Ethan finally approached me, his voice frail. "Claire, please, can we talk about this?" "Privately?" I looked at him, not with rage, but with clarity that cut deeper. "You had your chance to talk. You chose silence." "I was trying not to escalate," he said. "I didn't want things to get worse." "For who I asked? Me or your mother?" He opened and closed his mouth, unable to form an answer. Behind us, Harris received another call. "Miss Donovan," he said, stepping closer. "Your father approved the initiation of emergency board review. Contracts tied to Acadia Estates are being pulled. Financial departments have frozen cooperative accounts pending investigation." A visible jolt ran through Kenneth. "You can't freeze our accounts," he said, voice cracking. "Our developments are mid-construction." "Not anymore," Harris replied. "Not with partnership terms violated." The humiliation became unbearable for them. You could feel it, the crush of consequences closing in. The officers moved to escort Margaret and Natasha aside for questioning, and venue security positioned themselves near the exits to ensure no one interfered. Every eye in the ballroom had shifted from judgment to fear. Every whisper circled around the same realization: the Millers were falling, and they were falling hard. As I stood there watching the unraveling, I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't revel in their downfall. I simply breathed. For the first time all night, I felt oxygen reach the bottom of my lungs. Because justice isn't loud. Justice doesn't scream. Justice simply arrives when truth is given room to stand. And tonight, it was standing taller than it ever had. The Millers were no longer the predators in the room. They were the cautionary tale. And this was only the beginning of what they would face. When the officers finished gathering statements and Rowan stepped aside to take a call from my father, the ballroom settled into an eerie quiet. Not peaceful, not calm. Just the kind of stillness that comes after a building has been evacuated but before anyone knows whether it will collapse. People lingered in small clusters, whispering behind hands, avoiding eye contact with me as though acknowledging me might implicate them. I could feel their discomfort wrapping around the room like fog, but none of it mattered. The only movement that caught my attention was Ethan edging slowly toward me, his steps hesitant, almost trembling. He looked nothing like the confident man who once told me he wanted a future with me. His tie was crooked, his hair disheveled, and there was a sheen of panic in his eyes. "Claire," he said softly, "please, can we talk?" I didn't respond at first. I simply observed him the way someone watches a stranger trying to mimic familiarity. He swallowed, stepping closer. "Everything tonight got out of hand. My mom, she wasn't herself. She gets anxious around new people. You know how she is?" I raised my eyebrows slightly, the only indication of my reaction. "I should have stopped it," he continued. "I know that now. I should have defended you. I should have said something sooner. I didn't want things to escalate." His voice cracked on the last word, as though he finally realized how hollow it sounded. "Ethan," I said quietly, "things escalated the moment you chose not to protect me." He flinched. I was overwhelmed. My parents there was so much happening. I just froze. "No," I replied, my voice steady as stone. "You didn't freeze. You calculated. You weighed your comfort against my dignity, and you chose yourself." He shook his head violently. "No, that's not fair, Claire. I love you." I just didn't know what to do. "People show love through courage," I said. not silence. The words seemed to hit him harder than anything that had happened that night. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a pleading whisper. "Please don't leave me. Don't let tonight be the end of us. I'll fix everything. I'll talk to your father. I'll talk to mine. We can get past this." I studied him for a long moment. The desperate tremble in his hands, the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of consequences he helped create, the frantic hope in his eyes that I might erase everything with a single forgiving word. But forgiveness isn't an eraser, and love isn't a bandage for cowardice. "You're sorry," I said finally, "because of who I am, not because of what you allowed." His lips parted, but no defense came. No protest, no explanation. Just the hollow exhale of someone realizing too late that the truth had already arrived and it wasn't leaving room for negotiation. I turned away, signaling to Harris that I was ready to leave. Ethan took a small step after me, but he didn't reach out. Maybe he knew better. Maybe he finally understood that the version of me who once believed in him no longer existed. As I walked toward the exit, the weight of the night lifted from my shoulders, replaced not with bitterness, but with clarity. I wasn't abandoning him. He had abandoned me long before I ever chose to walk away. The aftermath unfolded with the precision of a slow, controlled demolition. Nothing collapsed all at once. Instead, everything that the Miller family had propped up with status intimidation and generational arrogance began to splinter piece by piece. And the world watched it happen not because of me, but because they had chosen to humiliate someone publicly in an era where cameras are always recording. 72 hours after the incident, the live stream clips had been dissected by every social media platform, local news station, and gossip blog within reach of the internet. The video wasn't just viral, it was everywhere. Analyzed frame by frame, the audio enhanced the comments, exploding into debates about classism, entitlement, and the culture of privilege in elite circles. Reporters camped outside the Miller home not because of my family's involvement, but because people wanted to hear Margaret explain why she slapped a woman she had met for the first time. Miller Properties released a statement calling the incident a deeply unfortunate misunderstanding, which only added fuel to the fire, because the videos clearly showed it wasn't misunderstanding at all. It was cruelty. Within 8 days, 3 corporate sponsors withdrew from Miller Properties' upcoming development project, citing ethical concerns about leadership behavior. A week after that, the country club's board issued a formal statement banning Margaret and Natasha indefinitely for violating member conduct policies. Their names were quietly removed from the donor wall, but the internet had already preserved them forever in screenshots. At the 30-day mark, things began shifting from public outrage to real consequence. My family's legal team finalized the civil filing supported by eyewitness statements and the venue's internal security footage. The police report, though restrained in language, made clear that the slap and forced physical contact constituted assault. Ethan's father attempted to negotiate privately with my family to avoid a public case, but by then the narrative had taken on a life of its own. Every attempt to minimize it appeared desperate and insincere, especially after a leaked email showed Kenneth urging a PR advisor to shift blame back onto the girl. The girl was me. That email alone tanked whatever goodwill the public might have had left. By 60 days, the economic consequences began tightening. Banks reviewing the Miller family's existing credit lines raised concerns about reputational volatility resulting in paused expansions and delayed approvals. Real estate investors backed out of partnerships quietly but decisively. In these circles, money doesn't disappear loudly. It evaporates in the form of unanswered calls and meetings that can't be scheduled this quarter. Meanwhile, Natasha faced her own reckoning. Several brands she had influencer deals with announced they would not renew her contracts, citing alignment concerns with company values. Her own social media comments section became an endless battlefield, forcing her to turn off replies entirely. Apology videos were posted, then deleted, then reposted with different lighting, but none changed the reality that people had watched her rip another woman's dress while laughing. 90 days in the settlement discussions reached the stage where my attorneys no longer spoke of if, but how much. The venue cooperated fully, the police report was complete, and every digital angle of the assault had been archived. My restraining order request was approved temporarily, then extended after Margaret attempted to send me a handwritten apology letter, which, according to the court, violated contact restrictions. Around that same time, Ethan tried reaching out again through an email so long it felt like a thesis statement on regret. I didn't respond. The legal process didn't need my emotions, and my healing didn't require his explanations. In the closed world of their social circles, the Millers became a cautionary tale whispered at charity luncheons and behind manicured hands. Not because they'd wronged a wealthy family, but because they'd treated a stranger with contempt before learning who she was. That was the part people remembered. Not the money, not the chaos, the arrogance. And in the quietest moments of those months, I realized something unexpected. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it simply arrived step by step like a tide, shifting the landscape until the world no longer resembled what came before. In the months that followed, the noise around the scandal slowly faded. Not because people forgot, but because life has a way of shifting its gaze to the next headline. What didn't fade was the clarity I gained from that night. Healing wasn't loud or dramatic for me. It arrived in small, steady pieces, like finding myself breathing easier in rooms where I once felt the need to shrink. I spent more time at the waterfront districts where my family's company supported port workers, a place where lives were built on grit, long hours, and unspoken camaraderie. There was something grounding about standing among people who valued effort over appearance and character over social performance. I joined a volunteer initiative connecting veterans to stable housing through port partnerships. Sitting with them listening to stories of resilience far greater than mine quietly reshaped my understanding of strength. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about winning a public battle. Strength was simply choosing to stand tall after someone tried to pull you apart. My father, once so protective he seemed carved from steel, became softer in those months, often reminding me that surviving humiliation with dignity was a testament to who I truly was. Money didn't save you that night, he said once. Your character did. Everything else came later. He was right. The revenge, the consequences, the fallout. None of it mattered as much as reclaiming the parts of myself I had doubted when Ethan stood silent. For a long time, I believed healing required closure from the people who hurt me. But it didn't. Closure came from accepting that some people are incapable of meeting you where your integrity stands, and that their failure is not your burden. I didn't block Ethan's final email, but I left it unread. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed answers from a man who couldn't protect me when it counted. Instead, I learned to invest in people who showed kindness without calculation, who treated everyone with the same respect they expected for themselves. My story became something others quietly shared when discussing dignity class and the unseen battles many women fight in relationships shaped by power imbalances. And if there is anything I want someone to take from what happened to me, it's this. Never let someone convince you that your worth depends on the status they hold or the room you walk into. Worth is built on character unshaken by judgment and untouched by humiliation. When people show you who they are in moments of power, believe them. And when they try to dim your light, remember that the brightest strength you possess is the courage to walk away.